Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Today, we're going to be talking Runegrafts, we're going to be talking tattoos, we're going to be talking mirror shards. We're going to be talking about the state of Kingsmarch shipping in patch 3.28. But this video, more than many of my others, needs to start with a disclaimer. And that is that whilst I've been having a look at all of the available information that's been shared on this around the internet, we can't yet absolutely perfectly flawlessly optimize Kingsmarch. And if you're looking for that, that information doesn't exist yet. There are people inside Grinding Gear Games that know the formula and that would be able to mathematically compute what is the best possible way to ship these days, but that information is not available to the public. And anyone that says they've got that information is either being dishonest or they just don't understand that they don't have it. Now we need to talk about changes from 3.27, 3.26, 3.25. And we want to start with that with talking about the 3.28 patch note changes. But also we're going to need to talk about some of the economy key changes as well, because 3.28 is a weird league economy. Every single Runegraft in the game is selling for 21 chaos at the moment. That is because, not that people want to apply them to their character, but because there is a 3-for-1 vendor recipe for them. Also, a bunch of tattoos are selling for way more than you would ever think, again, because there is a 3-for-1 vendor recipe on tattoos as well, and that's something you need to keep in mind. But let's start with the 3.28 changes to game mechanics first, then we'll look at some of the effects of those economic changes as well. Now, there are two major changes you must know about. The first one is that Grinding Gear Games decided to gigabuff the returns for shipping ores and bars. In the past, these returned trash. They returned either equipable items or miscellaneous good stuff like scarabs and stack decks. Nowadays, they're going to return currency items. This is a huge buff, out of sight. Shipping off crops though, this has been crushingly nerfed. In the past, it returned currency. Now it returns equipment items. However, it's not dead because of the next thing that we're going to talk about. And that is that shipments from Kingsmarch to Karui and Kalguran ports will now grant specific tattoos or specific runegrafts. So what this means in practice is that each tattoo and each runegraft is assigned to a particular port. And in a couple of cases, there's more than one port that can give them. And so if you send a shipment out to Ngakanu, then every tattoo that you get will be red, or it'll be one of the journey tattoos, but they're so rare they practically don't exist. And if you want to send off Runegrafts anywhere, you'll need to go to a Kalguran port, but you're going to want to pick Pondium. We'll get to that in a sec, but that's because Runegraft of the Warp is one of the most expensive of the Runegrafts at the moment. And unlike a lot of the other things that are expensive, Runegraft of the Warp isn't particularly rare. And that's important to remember. It means that there's just an extra really lucrative thing that you can get whenever you send off a boat to Pondium. That's on top of also Runegraft of the Fortress being available on every single one of the different Runegraft shipments ports as well. So there's a bunch of other things that are important to note here as well. That is reduced costs for certain types of wages in Kingsmarch, increases for others. But the most important ones are what we've talked about there. Less important, but still significant when we get to talking about Yender's stand, is that favored resources can be re-rolled for 15,000 gold. I urge you to keep that one in your mind, and I'll put a reminder of that when we get to that point in the video. And in stealth changes, it does appear that the probability of getting a mirror shard out of the Kingsmarch system does seem to have decreased from what it was in the past. I am not absolutely confident that this is a targeted nerf. In fact, what I think it is a reflection of Exalted Orbs and Regal Orbs having their drop rate buffed. This means that Exalted Orbs, which are now 20 times as common as they used to be, they're now taking up more of the space on the boats than they were previously. Likewise, the same thing is true for Regal Orbs, which also got a giga buff in their drop rate. So this means there's a little bit less room for the best of the currencies, and of course, mirror shards are among the best of them. We don't know the exact details here. You have also picked up a couple of new good things as well, like Fracturing Orbs are now something that can drop. Ancient Orbs can drop. Both of those are okay. Fracturing Orbs are more than okay, but they're also pretty rare as well. Anyways, it does seem like the raw currency returns that you get for a 50 million shipment do seem to be nerfed, and they seem to be nerfed by a moderate but not an overwhelming amount. This one's interesting though, because a lot less people are engaging with the shipping system, and that means that the other rewards that come out of this system, they have gone up. This is where we're going to start talking about the two strategies that I'm going to recommend here, one of which revolves around tattoos, one of which revolves around optimizing both for Runegrafts and simultaneously chasing after Yender's stand. All of this, however, is going to be pretty heavily predicated upon the current Trade League economy. If there's big changes in this, then I will put down in the description below all of the information from the Path of Exile wiki about which tattoos come from which port, which Runegrafts come from which port, and then you can work out from that how you want to change around the strategy in order to suit a new economy that might exist in the future. For example, Runegraft of the Warp being nearly 10 divines, this is something that really does distort the value of every single Runegraft in the game. What we can say is that Mirror Shards are definitely rarer than they were from King's March in the past. I don't actually think that this is necessarily due to a targeted nerf. What I think has gone on is that Grinding Gear Games made a number of buffs to currency orb drop rates. So we know the Exalted Orb had its drop rate increased by a factor of 20 in the patch. It went from the same rarity as the Divine Orb to the same rarity as the Orb of Regret. At the same time, we also know that the Regal Orb had its drop rate increased substantially as well, from 6 times as common as the Divine Orb to something like 25 times as common as the Divine Orb now. So with Regals and Exalts way more common, they take up some of the space on the boats that are coming back. And that might actually be the entirety of the change that was made. Or possibly Grinding Gear Games might have tweaked some of the formulas behind the scenes, or possibly we're still focused on some strategies that just worked a little bit better in the past than they do now. However, what we can say is that if you send off approximately 50 million worth of mixed bars, it seems like you're getting about 1 Mirror Shard back on average. You'll also get Fracturing Orbs, Sacred Orbs in small numbers. And when we say small, 0 is common, 1 is common, 2 is common, 3 is starting to get uncommon, 4 and 5 possible but not very common. So you get small numbers of those. Mirror Shards, seems like you mostly get 1, but you definitely can get 0, and you can get 0 3 times in a row if you're unlucky, and you can get more than that. The most I've seen is 3 Mirror Shards in one shipment, but it's quite possible that there's been more that just haven't been talked about as much. On top of this though, you'll also get a fair number of Divine Orbs, and the Divine Orbs end up being most of the raw currency that you get when you're unlucky and you don't get a single Mirror Shard. That's setting off big metal bar shipments though, and I don't actually know that that's necessarily the best thing to do anymore. The reason for that is that 2 other classes of items have gotten way more expensive this league. The first one is tattoos, the second one is Runegrafts. Now, let's start by looking at Runegraft, shall we? Runegraft of the Angler. This thing is so rare that you'll probably never see it. Then we have Runegraft of the Warp and Runegraft of the Fortress. You might be thinking, oh, these have got to be the second and third rarest, right? Look how expensive they are compared to everything else. No, they are not rare at all. Warp and Fortress are amongst the middling tier rarities, and there's a big difference in Runegrafts between Gemcraft and Solwick, and I think there's 2 others as well. These are the rare ones. Warp and Fortress are not in that category, and they're a lot more common than that. And one last thing that needs to be said as a bit of a disclaimer here is that when you're sending shipments to Pondium, we do not know that the probability of getting a Warp Runegraft is commensurate with the chance of getting a Warp Runegraft with the 3-for-1. This isn't proven. It seems plausible from having a look at a number of publicly available shipments, but I can't absolutely guarantee that. If it does turn out that Grinding Gear Games have got different ratios here, then that will actually mean that the sending of shipments to Pondium is less favorable than we're estimating here. And ultimately, this is the sort of thing that's not going to be known for certain for maybe 6 or 8 weeks. What this means is that actually, if you can get a lot of Runegrafts in your shipment, this is actually a fairly tempting thing you can do. And on top of that, when you're chasing Runegraft of the Warp, you also can get Runegraft of the Fortress as well. So the way that Runegrafts work now, when you ship to Ribenfell, you get dexterity aligned and attribute unaligned Runegrafts sent back to you. When you ship to Pondium, you get intelligence aligned and unaligned. When you ship to Kelgur, you get strength aligned Runegrafts and you get other unaligned Runegrafts. Amongst the unaligned ones, Runegraft of the Fortress is actually the only one that is reasonably common. You've got Runegraft of the Fortress as uncommon, you've got Gemcraft, which is rare, and you've got Angler, which is staggeringly rare. With Pondium, Runegraft of the Warp is in the slightly more rare than uncommon category, and then all of the rest of these are mixed rarities. So anytime you send a shipment to Pondium, you've got a good chance of getting Runegraft of the Warp and or Runegraft of the Fortress. And the way that these work, approximately every 400,000 shipment value that you send, not counting dust, will return 1 Runegraft. Now, this has a cap of 99, so if you send more than 39.6 million non-dust, then you'll end up getting only 99 back. So one of the things you might consider doing is you can send huge shipments to Pondium. You can send 39.6 million worth of bars, and you can season it with 10.4 million worth of dust, because that does seem to still favor rarer currency outcomes. If you do this, you'll get 99 Runegrafts, And some of them will be warp, some of them will be fortress, and you've also sent off a 50 million shipment, which will then have a chance of giving you mirror shards as well. This is strategy one, and I think this one's reasonably solid. There's a little bit more you're going to want to do in order to set that up as well. We'll come to that in a sec. The second option that I think is also really strong is to have a look at tattoos. So let's have a look firstly at the prices on the tattoos, and we should also discuss the rarity of tattoos. Tattoos have the journey tattoos. Let's just pretend they don't exist. They're really, really crazy rare. But then we have the regular tattoos. These come mostly in two different rarities, common and uncommon. Now, there is a little bit more variance than that, particularly with the Kitava tribe ones, but for most of them, there are common ones, which are 3 times as common, and there are uncommon ones, which are 3 times as rare. Arungui Shaman, uncommon. Volako Shieldbearer, uncommon. Ramako Shaman, uncommon. Ramako Fleetfoot, uncommon. Namhu Firewalker, common. Notice that this is not including the journey tattoos, the 5th most expensive tattoo. It's one of the only 5 that are over a divine. This one's important because if you have a look at these top options here, you've got a lot of value that's tied up in the red ones. So you've got Valako Shieldbearer at uncommon, you've got Namahu Warmonger at uncommon, and you've got Namahu Firewalker at common. What this ends up being is that every 43 red tattoos that you send, you'll end up getting an average of 1 Shieldbearer, 1 Warmonger, and 3 Namahu Firewalkers. This should actually be pretty interesting. That's quite a bit of value that you've got there. On top of that, there's also a bunch of red ones that kind of aren't trash. Namahu Woodcarver here, 27 Chaos. It's not worth a lot, and in fact, its value is held up by the fact that people are buying it in order to 3-for-1 it, because if you vendor 3 Namahu tribe tattoos, you receive back a random Namahu tribe tattoo. And there's a chance of getting one of the Namahu Firewalkers. It's actually a pretty good chance, and there's a modest chance of getting a Warmonger out of it. And there's also Namahu Shaman, which is worth something as well. So what we've got here is a situation where the red tattoos are pretty juicy. Now, the green ones aren't bad either, and that's because you've got Ramako Shaman, Ramako Fleetfoot. Both of these are uncommon, but they pull up the value of all of the less desirable of the Ramako tattoos. So it's not like many people are applying Ramako Sniper to their build, or Ramako Archer, or Ramako Scout. People do it sometimes, but they're not very common choices, and there's plenty of supply for them. Most of the demand on these is people 3-for-1ing them, chasing after the better tattoos. What you'll see here is that fundamentally, there's a lot of value that's available amongst the tattoos. And with tattoos, you actually get a lot of these if you send smaller shipments. Tattoos reward sending shipments that are 3.9 million or less, excluding the value of any dust that you put in. So a second strategy that you've got is you can send shipments that are approximately 3.9 million value, not including any dust that's in them, and you can send them to Namahu. If you send them to Namahu, you'll get back strength tattoos. Now, you could also send them for intelligence, you could send them for dexterity, but it's my opinion that these will end up being worse because the best hit on the Namahu is almost as good as the best hit anywhere else, but you've just got so much more depth. So much more depth than you get anywhere else. So, currently, with the way the market is at the moment, sending shipments of approximately 4 million X dust to Namahu is pretty juicy, and sending shipments that are truly massive to Pondium, chasing after the Runegrafts of the Warp and the Fortress, is also a very viable option. Let's talk though about the third reward that you can chase. And this one also plays in to the Pondium strategy. So, Yender's Stand. This belt is extremely valuable at the moment, looking like 38 div at the moment, and it's extremely strong for certain builds. What this does is it transforms the effect of the base defenses that are found on your armor away from armor and evasion and into providing ward instead. This can be really strong on certain builds. Most builds don't want it, but it can be really strong. Anyways, Yender's Stand is quite rare. This is the most valuable currently of the 4 different port quota exclusive uniques. Let's have a look at port quotas because they're the next thing we need to talk about in this video. Right, so what we need to do now is talk about port quotas. Port quotas provide you with an additional reward when you fill them, and on top of that, they juice up the shipments that you send. So here you can see that I have sent off a shipment with 37,423 units of Aureolcum bars. That's to Pondium. Now, Pondium has an Aureolcum bounty here. They want 140,000 units, but bars actually count for 5 and ores count for 1. So what's happening here is that the first 28,000 are going to fill up that 140,000 bounty that they've got. That first 28,000 bars, they're going to have their normal rewards double because of that plus 100% bonus. This actually isn't all that significant because it means that instead of sending 37,423 bars, I've instead sent a little bit more than that. However, the reason I went up to 37,000 there was that I wanted to get over 800,000, so I'm almost certain to end up getting 2 Runegrafts back. Now what we're doing here is we are filling out a particular reward request here from Pondium for a slim chance. It's only a slim chance, but it is a real chance of getting Yender's stand. That's the goal that we've got here. Now, if you want to hyper optimize for this, you could make a level 52 character to turn these in on. The reason that I say 52 here is because 52 is the minimum level a character needs to be in order to get Yender's stand. There are a few quite common uniques that start getting added into the pool and thus diluting the pool once you get to higher levels than 52. However, I don't see any evidence that this is so strongly beneficial that it's worth all the effort that's involved. So in short, what we're going for here is we are filling up a particular port request for Orielcum here. In doing so, we're both getting the normal rewards that you get for sending a shipment to Pondium, i.e. we're getting Runegrafts and we're also getting some currency back for sending metal, but at the same time, we're also getting a bit of a free roll chance at getting Yender's stand. Calm's Command is the other one of these that you want to keep your eye on, but Calm's Command was very valuable at the start of the league, it's less so now. What should you do though if there's a request for crops that you can't meet at one of the ports? For example, let's say that this was a new request here and that I just didn't have any blue xanthemum. What I would do in that case, you can right click the port and it will drain 15,000 gold from you, but by doing so, it will re-roll the port quota. That is something that can then give you a second chance to get something that you can actually complete, and then you can send off those medals that are important. And it's editing GOG here. I ended up sending this one off. I got an unwanted unique. I got a fracturing orb as the only good currency item, and I got 2 Runegrafts, but neither of them were any good. Just keep in mind though that because the 3-for-1 Runegraft recipe exists and people are actively doing it, absolutely every single Runegraft sells for more than 20 chaos at the moment. So in short, there are really 2 options you're looking at here. Sending shipments of no more than 4 million, not including dust, to Ngakanu, or sending shipments potentially much larger out to Pondium. The rewards you're chasing, if you're sending to Ngakanu, you don't really care about the port quotas that much, they're just a small little bonus. The main thing that you're chasing here is those tattoos. Anything else is a bonus. If you're sending to Pondium, you are chasing 2 specific Runegrafts, Runegraft of the Warp, Runegraft of the Fortress, and obviously if you happen to get an Angler one, fantastic, but you won't. And you're also chasing your completed port quotas, chasing after that potential chance of getting Yender's stand. If Calm's Command goes up in price again, which I don't think it will this league, but if it does, then that's an additional reason to consider Ngakanu. Finally, mirror shards. Yes, they are a thing still, but they're not as significant as they've been in the past. And as a result, I think right now, the best advice that I can give you is to optimize around the other rewards that you're getting. And if you get a mirror shard, fantastic. You will be more likely to get mirror shards if you go with the Pondium approach, but it's not going to be as significant a percentage of the wealth that you get from the settlers system as it was in previous leagues. I'm going to leave it there. May your boats have interesting results.